Dea Roma, The Women of the Century short story by JameliaAlicia. She entered her loving herself era, quietly, without the resistance of others. Not with a manifesto or a haircut or a sudden disappearance from everyone who had ever doubted her, but with a steadiness that surprised even her. A soft no where there used to be apology. A hand on her own chest when anxiety rose, instead of reaching outward for permission to breathe. Her name was Althea, and for the first time in her life, she trusted herself. On the morning the world bent, she stood barefoot in her apartment, sunlight pooling on the floor like warm milk. The mirror reflected her without judgment. She saw strength in the slope of her shoulders, history in her eyes that told 1,000 stories. She whispered, almost playfully, "I am enough." The words did not echo. They answered. The room trembled, not violently, but like a held breath, finally released. Light stretched thin, time folding in on itself like silk drawn through a ring. The mirror darkened, then opened, and Althea stepped forward. She landed on marble, cool veined stone beneath her palms. The air was heavy with incense and iron and wildflowers crushed under sandals. Voices surrounded her, low, commanding, musical, speaking a language she somehow understood without ever having learned. Latin. She rose slowly, heart racing but mind strangely calm. Around her stood women, not the silent, obedient figures she had been taught Roman women were supposed to be, but warriors, scholars, judges, priestesses. Their hair was braided with gold thread, their eyes sharp with intelligence. Bronze armor gleamed beside flowing linen. Power lived in their posture. At the center of them all stood a woman taller than the rest, cloaked in crimson. Her gaze pinned Althea in place. "Welcome," the ancient woman said. "You crossed when you were ready." Althea swallowed. "Ready for what?" The woman smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, but knowingly. "To remember who you are." This was not Rome as history had written it. This was Dea Roma, the goddess world that existed beneath the empire's surface, threaded through centuries like a hidden backbone. A realm where the Roman goddesses were not myths, but architects of time, guardians of balance, keepers of women's autonomy. Minerva taught strategy and knowledge not as weapons, but as shields. Diana ruled over independence, her forests echoing with the footsteps of women who had chosen themselves. Venus, misunderstood for centuries, governed self-worth before desire, beauty before conquest. And Juno presided over it all, not as a jealous wife, but as the goddess of sovereignty. "History erased us," Juno told Althea, as they walked through a hall of living murals, scenes shifting with each step. Women voting in ancient assemblies, women leading armies, women writing laws later attributed to men. "Why show me this?" Althea asked. "Because you live in an age where the remembering has begun again," Juno replied. "And remembrance requires witnesses to reclaim stories." Time in Dea Roma did not move forward. It spiraled. Althea saw centuries at once. She watched Rome rise and fracture. She saw how patriarchal power slowly overlaid the goddess world, burying it beneath marble statues and rewritten laws. She felt the moment women's voices were narrowed, then silenced, then mythologized. "Feminist movements are not new," Minerva said, placing a hand over Althea's heart. "They are returns." The words lodged deep inside her. At night, if night could be called that in a realm lit by eternal dusk, Althea dreamed of her own world, of protests, of women holding signs and children and rage and hope, all at once. Of conversations whispered in kitchens. Of choices made despite fear. "Why me?" she asked Venus one evening, watching the goddess braid starlight into her hair. Venus met her reflection in the water. "Because loving yourself is a radical act, and radical acts open doors." This was something which the gods was hiding from the human world, and only the female goddesses knew this secret. The goddesses did not ask Althea to fight. They asked her to listen. She learned how power could be shared without being diluted, how softness could be strategic, how self-love could dismantle empires that thrived on women's doubt. She learned that time travel was not about changing the past, but carrying truth forward. On the final day, or the moment that felt like one, Juno led her back to the mirror portal. "You cannot stay," Juno said, "but you will never leave us." Althea felt grief then. What if they don't listen? Juno placed a crown, not of gold, but of light, on her head. They will, not all at once, but every era has women who remember early. She returned to her apartment exactly where she had left it, sunlight still on the floor, the mirror whole again. But Althea was different. She carried Dea Roma in her spine, in her voice when she spoke up, in her boundaries, in the way she loved herself publicly, unapologetically, as if it were ancient law. She joined movements not as a savior, but as a thread. She wrote, she marched, she rested. She reminded other women, quietly, fiercely, that they came from goddesses, whether they believed it or not. Sometimes, when she stood before the mirror and whispered, "I am enough," she swore she could hear footsteps on marble. And somewhere beyond time, the goddesses smiled. Because the feminist movement was never a beginning. Minerva's spiral. Knowledge as inheritance. Minerva did not teach Althea in lessons. She taught her in moments. A Senate chamber dissolving into a modern lecture hall. Wax tablets blurring into glowing screens. Men speaking over women across centuries, uninterrupted by time itself. "Watch," Minerva said, her armor etched with constellations rather than battles. Knowledge is never neutral. It is either guarded or given. In my heart, these feelings deserve to be set free. Althea stood inside overlapping eras. She saw a Roman woman philosopher, forced to publish under a male name. A medieval abbess, hiding manuscripts beneath the altar. A 20th century woman laughed out of a boardroom for speaking too confidently. "They say time moves forward," Althea whispered. Minerva smiled. "Time repeats until the lesson is learned." She pressed her fingers to Althea's temples, and the spiral widened. Althea felt the weight of remembering, how self-doubt had been trained into her, how intelligence had been called arrogance, how curiosity had once been punished. "Your era calls it imposter syndrome," Minerva said. "We called it survival." When the vision released her, Althea understood loving herself meant trusting her mind without apology. In the Roman world, all what women saw as mistake, condemned and shadowed in society, was seen as a gift and box of opportunities. Diana's forest, freedom beyond permission. Diana's world was not marble. It was wild. Althea ran through forests that shifted climates with every breath. Ancient Italian pines, melting into tropical canopies, then into the urban green spaces women claimed in concrete cities. "I was taught freedom was loneliness," Althea said as they ran. Diana laughed, a sound like arrows striking bark. That was a lie told to keep women choosing cages. They leapt through time, a Vestal virgin breaking her vows to escape execution. A woman fleeing a Victorian marriage under cover of night. A modern woman choosing childlessness without justification. "Notice," Diana said, stopping at a clearing where moonlight pooled, "every era punishes the woman who leaves." Althea's chest ached. "And yet they leave anyway, because we refuse to submit to men." "Because freedom is older than fear," Diana replied. When Althea emerged from the forest, she carried a new understanding. Self-love was choosing herself, even when no applause followed, because self-love required an exchange from the old soul to the new soul. Venus's realm was water and reflection. But the mirrors lied less than Althea expected. She saw herself at every age: girlhood softness, adolescent confusion, adult sharpness. None of it edited. None of it ranked. They turned me into desire, Venus said quietly, so they wouldn't have to listen to me. The water rippled, revealing timelines: women marketed, measured, discarded. Beauty standards shifting like empires, always just out of reach. Self-love terrifies systems, Venus continued, because it removes their leverage. Althea touched her own reflection. For the first time, she did not critique. She witnessed. You do not owe beauty, Venus said. You inhabit it. The lesson followed Althea out of the water, like a second skin. IV, Juno's crown, power that endures. Juno's hall existed outside chronology. Queens knelt beside factory workers, mothers beside women who had chosen not to be. Leadership was not hierarchy here, it was responsibility. They reduced me to jealousy, Juno said, her voice echoing across centuries. Because a woman who governs herself is impossible to control. Althea watched timelines fracture, matriarchal laws overwritten, goddesses recast as footnotes, women taught to seek power through proximity rather than possession. What does my era need most? Althea asked. Juno's gaze was unwavering. Women who stay, who do not shrink when challenged, who understand that loving themselves is governance. She placed the crown of light more firmly on Althea's head. You are not visiting history, Juno said. You are continuing it. The return, carrying the spiral forward. Althea returned again and again. Not always to Dea Roma, but to moments that mattered. A suffrage march layered over a Roman procession. A courtroom where women argued bodily autonomy, beside ancient tribunals once ruled by priestesses. Protest chants echoing Latin hymns she somehow remembered. She aged in the mortal world while remaining timeless in memory. She taught other women, not as doctrine, but as permission. You are not late, she told them. You are right on time. Epilogue: the era that loves her back. When Althea is old, she stands before the mirror one last time. Her body bears history. Her eyes hold galaxies. She whispers, I am enough. This time, the mirror does not open. It reflects. And in that reflection stand countless women, past, present, becoming, each wearing a crown invisible to those who refuse to look like each other. Because all of us was individuals with a story to tell. Because the loving herself era was never a phase. It was an awakening. And it lasted longer than empires could reach.